Is God in or out of the Democratic National Platform? Hi, I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Sean Akers, who is the vice president of Middle Eastern Affairs. And Sean, we have seen the recent issues in the news regarding the controversy over the Democratic National Platform. And certainly one of those is Jerusalem, whether or not it is or is not the capital of Israel. Of course, we certainly believe that it is the capital of Israel. But the other one is whether or not God is in or out of the Democratic National Platform. And it's still unclear as to whether or not God is going to be mentioned or God is not going to be mentioned, or whether or not the vote that they had was actually a majority vote, or in this case, what they needed was a two-thirds majority vote.
That's exactly right, Matt. They needed a two-thirds majority. And remember, we're asking the question of whether God is going to show up in the Democratic platform or not. So setting that up with a two-thirds required majority, it's a fairly easy thing to accomplish, but things didn't go exactly the way they planned.
Well, in fact, for some reason, the Democratic National Platform, as it was written and as it was presented and released to the public during the convention, it did not have God mentioned in there. And of course, as a result of that, there was a lot of pushback from people around the country. And it appears as though from the top down, there was a desire to put that back in because this was taking all of the airtime away from the convention and focused on the issue of whether or not God was going to be part of the Democratic National Platform. God was mentioned in the Republican National Platform and has been in previous platforms, but in this one, was removed. And so I think in order to avoid some of that diversion of the media, there was a motion that was brought to the floor during the Democratic National Convention to reinsert God back into the platform. And that motion kind of went askew in a sense. We want you to listen to this because the question is, did this pass by a two-thirds majority vote? You'll listen to the actual vote. You'll listen to the chair of this, and he took not one, not two, but actually three voice votes. And rather than my opinion as to whether this passed by two-thirds majority, we want your opinion. Listen to this.
Hearing none, the matter requires a two-thirds vote in the affirmative. All those delegates in favor say aye. Aye. All those delegates opposed say no. In the opinion of let me do that again. All of those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. I guess
let them do what they're going to do.
I'll do that one more time. All those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds have voted in the affirmative. The motion is adopted, and the platform has been amended as shown on the screen.
Well, Sean, you heard that. What was your vote on there? What would you think? Did this pass by two-thirds majority vote in your view?
Well, I tell you what, Matt, if there were three of us in the room now, two of us would have to be completely silent. The fact is that didn't sound like a two-thirds majority vote by any means. If anything, it was 50-50 or maybe even 60-40 to taking the motion down.
Yeah, I know. Certainly, at a minimum, I think commentators across the board, liberal and conservative, but the various cable networks, whatever persuasion they are, Democrat or Republican, have really scratched their heads over this one because no one can unashamedly say that this was a two-thirds majority vote. When you listen to that again and again, three different votes, you ultimately find that this was at least a tie. There was as many yeses as there were nos to that motion. And in that respect, the motion would have failed, meaning that God would not have been added to the platform. But the chair, unbelievably, just simply demanded that that's the way it was going to be. And essentially it was strong-arm politics that ultimately won the day. And it does not reflect in my listening to this the consensus, or certainly not two-thirds, of those delegates voting on that motion.
No, Matt, this is from a political science standpoint, this is fascinating stuff because we're dealing with three different constituencies. We're dealing with the American people who reacted viscerally to the idea that God would be removed from any party's platform. And that caused a reaction in the party leadership. The party leadership responds by trying to put God back in, but the elements, the far left elements of the party proper, the delegates who are there to vote, obviously in this case, disagreed with the platform. So you've got the American people on one side, you've got the delegates on the other, and you've got the platform in the middle trying to keep this out of the news cycle.
Well, and then the way the cameras were angled, and all the news networks have used the same camera angle, you could see, first of all, that the chairman was befuddled and was about ready to call the vote and realized, he needs to do it again. And then after he did the second vote, he was befuddled again because, again, it came up as a tie. And you heard the voice of that person behind the chairman said, you've got to let them do what they're going to do. And he did the third vote, and it was even more clear that there was not a majority, and yet he declared it anyway. And then you saw the reaction of the people. They booed, and rightfully so. But the broader issue here is, I think, a startling one. And that is that there is this kind of controversy and apparently this level of opposition to putting God, to even mentioning Him in a political platform.
That's right.
That is so un-American in terms of our history. Our founding documents refer to our Creator in the Declaration of Independence. That's what really makes America different, because we acknowledge our Creator and that our rights come from our Creator, and that sole purpose of government is to protect these God-given rights.
You know, there are at least 2 points here that would make the founders roll over in their graves. One is that we're arguing over whether God should be in any party's platform, and the other is that if you're going to take a vote, you got to let it count. Yeah. You can't just ignore it and do what you wanted to anyway. So you've really offended American tradition and the Judeo-Christian principle of democracy on 2 counts here.
Yeah, I mean, the vote was a sham at any rate. I think, you had the leader of the Democratic Party, President Barack Obama, no doubt was surprised and pushed back at this particular situation, whatever, but that directive came from higher sources to put it back in. But when the vote didn't actually pan out that way, they put it back in anyway. Yeah. But I think the bigger issue is, have we come to the point in America where a segment of society ultimately does not want to acknowledge God as part of who we are? And the boos in that crowd when the chair declared that it passed were startling, that there's that kind of opposition to even acknowledging that there is a God. And I think that really is an issue that is broader that we really need to look at and consider the impact.
I agree, Matt. I mean, the very first step to making things better is to acknowledge the condition that we're in, and that was a real showing of the condition that we're in.
It really is. And, certainly the American Revolution would not have been the American Revolution if it weren't for the Great Awakening. It was that spiritual renewal of the Great Awakening and the great preachers of the day that ultimately gave birth to the American Revolution and the American dream and the liberty that we enjoy. If we come to the point in America where we believe that we don't need God, we need to hearken back to the time when they debated the Constitution and they didn't have agreement on anything. It was about ready to fall apart. Benjamin Franklin stood up in the midst, and he ultimately implored that they acknowledge God, and ultimately said that if a sparrow can't fall to the ground without his knowledge, how can an empire rise without his aid? They convened a prayer meeting. They acknowledged God, and as a result of that, America was eventually born. Go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org. We want to make sure that you are informed about your liberties. You can ask for our Patriot's Handbook on American Liberty. It has the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We also have a comparison sheet between the 2 platforms, the Democratic National Platform and the Republican National Platform. You can get this information and you can read these 2 platforms. Be informed about your government and make sure that you make a difference in your community and in this country.